So, I bought this. Yes, this. Now, Sony fans would be like, "Oh my god, why didn't you get a PlayStation 5? Why is he still stuck on Microsoft?" While Xbox fans will be like, "Oh my god, why didn't you buy an Xbox Series X?" Ho ho, relax. I'll answer all those probably in the next video, so not to make this video longer. Today, however, we'll talk about whether a $300 all-digital console that promises next-gen performance delivers what it promises or not. Hey guys, Cop Inferno here. Let's talk about the Xbox Series S. This will be interesting. In case you haven't already seen what comes in the box, let's see what we get. It's a nicely designed compact box, white on the front with the Series S rendered along with the controller, white on the back with detailing at least a few things that you get when you get on board with Team Green, and of course, the top and sides of the box are white as well. The only place where you see the trademark Xbox green is at the bottom from where you can open the box. You're greeted with the console as soon as you open the box. Full marks for the presentation though. A small rectangular box up top comprises of all the accessories, namely the product and regulatory guide, a power cord, and an HDMI 2.1 cable, along with the robot white series controller with a couple of AA Duracell OEM batteries. The quick start guide is placed just beneath the console. Pretty basic and standard affair. Let's look at the controller first. At first glance, you won't find any glaring differences between the Xbox One controller and the Series controller, especially when you keep them side by side. Here are the DualShock 4 and the Gullikit King Kong controller for the Nintendo Switch, just for size comparisons. There are three new changes to the controller. A newly added share button, which you can use to capture screenshots or gameplay and share them directly on social media. An improved D-pad design which mimics the Elite controllers, and a USB Type-C connector which replaces the micro USB from the previous gen controllers. The texture on the controller is slightly changed too, with a tad bit smoother faceplate, and the grips are, well, grippier. I don't think the pictures can do enough justice here, but comparing the Xbox One controller with the Series controller, you can see at least a slight bit that the texture on the grips is now more pronounced. Up top, the glossy finish from the previous gen is replaced with a matte finish, with the shoulder buttons and triggers getting a nice textured pattern too. Right off the bat, the first thing I noticed is how different the D-pad and shoulder buttons feel. The rest of the buttons and even the shoulder triggers don't feel so different, it's just the D-pad and the shoulder buttons. They have a nice click when you press them. When I go back to the Xbox One controller now, these same feel just a bit mushy on it. Some minor changes that you might miss out noticing on the outside are the home button, or the Nexus button as it's called, now being slightly different too. The markings are flush with each other now with the same smooth texture, unlike the ridged markings and slightly glossy texture from the Xbox One controller. Also the shoulder triggers and buttons. The LT and RT triggers on the Series controller are no longer too outward curved, and the LB and RB buttons have their outer edges smoothed out. There are a lot of changes on the inside though, so if you want to know what those are, my mate Vince has done an awesome teardown on these. I'll link his video in the description as well. Overall, the controller has largely remained unchanged, at least externally. No major design overhaul, just a bit more refined. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I had the PowerA Play and Charge kit from my Xbox One S lying around, so I tried to give it a shot and see if it fits the new Series controller. The battery did fit in, but the battery door doesn't fit since the Series controller had a design update with the grooves being slightly moved to the sides. So I had to cut the clips on the battery door accordingly so that it could fit. The fitment is, well, still a bit finicky, but hey, it does sit well and the controller turns on. So if you have the same plain charge kit lying around and you don't want to shell out $18 again, well, here's your guide. The console. Oh my, the console. It's absolutely tiny. Here's my Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 1 Slim for a size comparison. Also my PC and laptop for funsies. Now you might think that a console this size won't be heavy, but it surprisingly has some heft to it considering its smaller frame. The design is more or less a revision of the Xbox One S. Now, some people will like it, some will absolutely hate it, the rest will make memes out of it, simple. I personally like it, except for the exhaust drill on the top. For once, it's not flush with the rest of the body, just a bit raised, and of course, it's black, while the rest of the console is white. This might just be my opinion, but I guess the design will grow on me over time. Gone is the stacked design of the revised Xbox One family. We have a simple, uniformly sized box with a USB-A in the front and the pairing button with the built-in IR sensor. While at the back, we have the power port, the storage expansion port, HDMI out, two USB-As, an Ethernet port, and a Kensington lock port. For the uninitiated, yes, you can pair your Xbox One accessories with the Series S without any issues. Also, a simple headphones with mic setup, something with split jacks for audio and mic input like this, works flawlessly through a splitter. Interestingly, while I was waiting for my console to arrive, I stumbled across few teardown videos from the guys at Adrenaline and also MVG, who also posted few really in-depth videos about ray tracing and the overall performance in general on the Series S. I'll highly recommend you to check their videos, links will be in the description below. Overall, based on what I've seen, the console seems really easy to open and work on when compared to the previous generation, thanks to the design updates. Give the design team a raise just because of this. Plus, Xbox being Xbox, have included a nice Easter egg inside. There's a motif for Master Chief's helmet on the power supply shroud. What I'm really curious about is the internal SSD, which looks kind of like a standard M.2 2230 from Western Digital, which in particular is the 512GB variant of the SN530, unlike the Seagate expansion card, which I think has a CF Express interface, and also the soldered memory in the PlayStation 5. Just for the nerds out there, the Western Digital SN530 is a PCIe Gen 3 x 4 drive, but Microsoft is touting the current gen Xboxes to have PCIe Gen 4 drives. So how's that possible then? Well, these aren't the OEM variants of the SN530, and like Microsoft said, these are indeed custom drives, apparently outfitted with an ASIC or a controller in layman terms to make these kind of hybrid drives capable of both PCIe Gen 3 x 4 and Gen 4 x 2 performance. Hence the lower than Gen 4 levels of anticipated speeds. So who knows? Maybe we'll be able to upgrade the internal storage someday if everything goes well, or just outright replace the SSD ourselves if it ever fails. Nothing guaranteed right now, just keep your eyes peeled. Setting up the console is a pretty standard affair. You need to have the Xbox app on your phone through which the entire setup goes forward. Absolutely a standard affair, but hey, it's quite easy. Alright, enough talk. Let's check how the Series S performs now. So with everyone mostly comparing the Series S and X with the One X, so many S's and X's in the name, I thought I'll do something different. I tried to compare it with my PC just to see how the Series S comparatively fares with respect to load times. Why, you ask? Just for fun, I say. Now I have a pretty fine custom gaming PC with a 6-core Ryzen 5 3600 based on the same Zen 2 architecture as the 8-core processor in the Series S and X. But my PC packs higher RAM than the Series S and an Nvidia RTX 2060 Super, which packs in 7.2 teraflops of theoretical performance when compared to the 4 teraflops of the Series S. But since we're not looking at a gameplay comparison between the two and it's just the load times, it all comes down to the SSDs then. My PC and the Crucial MX500 SSD packed in it are only PCIe Gen 3 x 4 compliant, which means that I can only push speeds of up to 4GB per second. Ideally, a true PCIe Gen 4 x 4 drive should reach speeds of up to 8GB per second, but the SSD in the Series S, of course, is based off a custom PCIe Gen 3 x 4 and Gen 4 x 2 architecture. And because of the hybrid nature of the drive, its max speeds have been relegated to 4.8GB per second. Well, at least on paper, the SSD doesn't seem to reach its full potential. But let's see how that fares in real world. Now I've specifically selected 4 games that support Xbox Play Anywhere for this test. Forza Horizon 4, Descenders, Streets of Rage 4, and of course, Halo Master Chief Collection.
Testing, 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 testing! Ah!
Forza Horizon 4 took 39 seconds to load from boot in the Series S, thanks also in parts to the skippable opening credits, while my PC took 49 seconds to load it. Descenders, on the other hand, took 16 seconds to load from boot in the Series S, while from the PC it was 23 seconds. No change for Streets of Rage 4, it took 4 seconds in either platforms to boot. Halo, the Master Chief Collection, took 3 seconds to boot on the Series S, while on the PC it took 7 seconds. So yeah, I think there are some improvements even over the limited PCIe Gen 4 bandwidth on the Series S's SSD. Now the Series S also supports external storage other than the Seagate expansion card, which means that you can go with a USB powered SSD, either SATA or NVMe, or if you really want to go even cheaper for a lot more storage, you can go with USB 3.0 external hard drive like I did. I actually bought 2 different USB 3.0 hard drives, a WD Elements 1.5 TB for my games and a Seagate expansion portable 500 GB for game captures. The speeds aren't really great. The Seagate is comparatively worse out of the two, but you can't expect much out of a mechanical drive. So, per Microsoft, you can't play Series S and X optimized games or Series S and X exclusive games off the hard drives. We don't have any Series S and X exclusive games to test, that's unfortunate. But we do have a lot of Series S and X optimized games, and from what I believe, the only optimization you're going to receive for such games would be in terms of load times. There wouldn't really be any effect on the actual graphical performance if they're being played out of a hard drive. So let's see if we can play any optimized games off the hard drive, and if yes, well, compare the load times. Unfortunately, you can't play optimized games off the external hard drive. You can only use the hard drive as a storage device. For such games, you will see an icon with arrows pointing either sides, meaning that you need to move these to the internal SSD in order to play. If you ignore this and still proceed to click on the game, it will prompt this error, asking you to go with the fastest storage to play the game. However, this rule surprisingly doesn't apply to all the optimized games. Out of all the games that I tested, I found one exception in the form of Halo, the Master Chief Collection, which received an update on November 17. It wasn't optimized until then. This game is playable off both the internal SSD and the external hard drive. So of course, I tried to test either of the versions out. As long as you have the game on the internal SSD, it still boots up within 3 seconds and takes 10 seconds to go in-game. When it's on the hard drive, however, the boot time takes a hit since the opening credits are not skippable, and going in-game takes 19 seconds. There are no changes in the way the game plays though. Well, since we are looking at load times, let's try some games that aren't yet officially confirmed as optimized by Microsoft and see how they load and perform off the hard drive and the internal SSD. Apart from Halo, the Master Chief Collection, which showed some difference in the loading times between storages, even though it's an optimized game, which is again an exception to the rule, load times between storages for non-optimized games were surprisingly a hit or a miss. A few games do take a long time to load off the hard drive, while some show little to no difference at all compared to booting from the internal SSD. Streets of Rage 4, when booting from the hard drive, took the same time as from the internal SSD, i.e. 4 seconds. But on the other hand, Descenders bafflingly took a minute and 11 seconds to boot from the hard drive when compared to 16 seconds of the internal SSD, which we had noted earlier, a difference of 55 seconds. Another game to take note of is Tekken 7. It took 25 seconds to boot off the internal SSD compared to 34 seconds off the hard drive, a difference of 9 seconds. But the drastic change is obvious during the match load times. It took 18 seconds to load this particular match on the internal SSD, while the hard drive took, wait for it, 32 seconds to load this match. A difference of 14 seconds, which will be, well, more apparent to someone. So yes, play as much of the internal SSD as possible then. Let's try moving some games between storages. Now, you'll come across 4 different categories of games based on size. Games that go over 100 gigabytes, like Halo the Master Chief Collection. Games that be somewhere between 50 to 100 gigabytes, like Forza Horizon 4. Games that clock in between 25 to 50 gigabytes, like Need for Speed Payback. And games that are below 25 gigabytes in size, like Descenders. I've taken these 4 games as a benchmark and tried moving them between storages to see how fast they move. Remember that we are moving games between the internal SSD and the external mechanical hard drive. So first let's move these games from the hard drive to the internal SSD.
A few minutes later.
So Halo the Master Chief Collection took 26 minutes 37 seconds. Forza Horizon 4 took 19 minutes 54 seconds. Need for Speed Payback took 9 minutes 31 seconds, and Descenders took 3 minutes 2 seconds to move from the mechanical hard drive to the internal SSD. Now, let's move them back to the hard drive to see how long that takes.
A few moments later.
This time around, however, you see the time getting just over halved across the board. Halo the Master Chief Collection took 19 minutes 18 seconds. Forza Horizon 4 took 13 minutes 52 seconds, Need for Speed Payback took 5 minutes 6 seconds, and Descenders took a minute and 44 seconds to move to the mechanical hard drive. Your mileage may definitely vary, and if you're using a SATA or NVMe SSD off an enclosure, all this will be definitely done in no time. Let's look at some extended gameplay and observations on some games now. Now, I'm no digital foundry, but I'll try my best to give you some nice insight on how the games work on this new hardware without going too much into technicality. Plus, I'm sorry if I didn't cover the games that you requested or the games that you like. Also, please note that whatever footage you're seeing here for the gameplay is not of a capture card. It's captured directly from the Xbox Series S at 1080p SDR, which might have some issues, and also YouTube's compression. So, the quality might seem a bit off, but trust me, the games will look absolutely fine in real life. That clear?
Excellent!
Starting off, of course, with some optimized games. Halo the Master Chief Collection promised a frame rate of 120 as part of the optimization update, though I don't have a TV that supports it. But yes, Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary does look pretty smooth. Next up, Mortal Kombat 11. Now, this game received an optimization update a day before Halo the Master Chief Collection, and just like Tekken 7, which had equally bad load times, you can see the load times here being improved. One thing that I did notice about Mortal Kombat 11 is that it downloads in parts now. You get the base game at 46.3 gigabytes without the story mode. Those are optional downloads. You can download the story mode in either 1080p or 4K, which are clocked at 18.7 gigabytes and 36.8 gigabytes respectively. The gameplay though, the textures are slightly improved and I didn't see any frame rate drops. Forza Horizon 4, massive improvement over the Xbox One S version. 1080p 60 frames per second with no frame drops even when there's a lot going on the screen, like stuff flying all over the place. Also, remember when the cars in your garage took a long time to load? Well, that's a thing of the past now. Fast travel takes place a lot faster, and again, loading times between races is quick. Here's the thing about Gears 5. The actual gameplay is smooth at 1080p 60 FPS, but the cutscenes are still logged at 30 FPS. The Tourist is a game that's being marketed as capable of running at 4K on the Series S. Looking at the gameplay, you might think it might be true, but yes, smooth 1080p 60 FPS. Last but not the least for optimized games, Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I wanted to keep this for the last because visually it's the best game out of the bunch. It's the best game visually out of the entire first party Xbox library, period. You have a couple of options to choose from in the settings, 4K 60fps and 1080p 120fps. No 1080p 60fps out of the box. Since my TV is 1080p but only has a refresh rate of 60Hz, the game chooses to go the route of the refresh rate and chooses 4K 60fps but downscales to 1080p. Now let's look at a couple of OG Xbox titles. MX Unleashed shows some refined textures due to auto HDR, but no other changes apart from that. Runs at 30fps. The same applies to Star Wars Battlefront as well. Textures are slightly better with auto HDR, but the game runs at 30fps. Coming to the Xbox 360 library, we have Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Other than the match loading times being slightly optimized, there aren't many changes here. Then SSX. Nothing much has changed here too apart from load times. Runs at 30fps. Now let's move over to the Xbox One library, and we have plenty of games here. Let's start with an underrated gem, Sunset Overdrive, which if you haven't yet played, well, you definitely should. The game still runs at 900p 30fps, but unlike the Xbox One S, where we did observe some dips in the frames here and there, the gameplay looks smooth without any stutters. Also, the auto HDR tries to compensate a bit for the lack of full HD resolution.
Get on the fence, kid.
Next up, Forza Horizon 3. Runs at 1080p 30fps without any noticeable frame drops. Apex Legends. Runs at 1080p 60fps. Feels smooth like it should.
Enemy down. Reloading.
Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Now, Respawn, if you're listening, this game is in desperate need of an optimization patch now. It runs at 30fps with some minor stutters, but if you turn off motion blur and chromatic aberrations, and yes, you do get an option in the settings to turn these off, the stutters won't be too noticeable. Also, on the previous gen we had issues related to in-game stage loading, but thankfully that's no longer the case thanks to the much better internals.
Racy there? Oh, it's on. We're not finished yet.
Next up, Untitled Goose Game. Well, nothing much has changed here. The same applies to my friend Pedro. Need for Speed Heat. Well, it feels smooth, 1080p 30fps. I did come across some users who said that they were observing occasional black screens while playing the game, but during the time I tested the game, I didn't come across any such issues.
Neither are we.
Yeah? Speak for yourself. I'm out.
What the hell? Richie! Richie! Did he seriously just bail?
Continuing with Need for Speed, we have Need for Speed Payback. One major thing to note here is that the loading times have drastically changed, particularly when the game first boots up. We have a couple of more Need for Speed games to check, but let's look at a different genre now. Let's go back to Tekken 7. Apart from the faster load times, there are no other noticeable changes here.
KO. Round 3. Fight.
Dead Cells, no change once again. Looks the same, feels the same, but this kind of fits the game's personality. Ditto Hollow Knight Void Heart Edition. Next up, we have Strider. This is more of a stylish side-scrolling hack and slasher and is pretty good and well underrated. Though there's not much of a change from the Xbox One S, you should definitely try this game. Descenders. Fun multiplayer adventure cycling game, runs at 1080p 30fps. Next up, Streets of Rage 4. No changes here from the Xbox One S version apart from the load times. Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition. This loads faster when compared to the Xbox One S, but other than that, 1080p 60 FPS. Next up is Hot Shot Racing. This is a sweet throwback to the arcade racing games and it's really good, worth a shot. Nothing much has changed here though.
The cake was alive. Reconfiguring gyroscope. I'm doing very well.
Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice. I think Ninja Theory should try to optimize this game apart from getting a Senua's Saga. There are no drops in the frame rate, but the game, just like Xbox One S, runs at 1080p 30 FPS. Gears of War 4. Not many changes from the Xbox One S here. The game still runs at 1080p 30 FPS. Burnout Paradise Remastered. No changes here, looks great, plays great, 1080p 60 FPS. Here's a big one now, Battlefield 1. Remember the game having a dynamic resolution on the Xbox One where the resolution jumped between 720p and 900p depending on what was happening on the screen? Well, it's the same here. You still have dynamic resolution active and you still have the game running between 720p and 900p, though the frame rate looks quite stable at 60 without too many stutters. I highly doubt DICE patching this game.
Field gun is down! We're alright! She might rattle a bit, mate! One more down!
Alright then, let's wrap up the gameplay with the last couple of Need for Speed games. Need for Speed Rivals. Seems the same, 1080p 30 FPS.
Dispatch 1042 at reckless driving.
Officer reporting racers are destroying public property.
Suspect located. Continuing pursuit.
Lastly, we have 2015's Need for Speed. Visually, no matter what, the game still holds up to this day but runs at 30 FPS. So, 32 games, huh? I think that's a lot of games to sum up how the Series S might handle what you throw at it. Your mileage may still vary, and yes, it very well depends on how well optimized the game is too. With the gameplay out of the way, let's check out some other findings about the system itself. The thermals. Well, to sum up, the Series S does get warm. It doesn't get toasty, but you definitely would want to touch it over the exhaust grill when you're running demanding games like Forza Horizon 4 or Gears 5. In my testing, I found the Series S running at 44 degrees Celsius on an average when it's idling, doing nothing other than downloading games, with the lowest being 40 degrees Celsius and the highest being 47 degrees Celsius. When you run games, and most importantly some demanding ones, it starts pushing out some hot air, and in my testing, I found the temperature averaging at 64 degrees Celsius, with the lowest being 61 degrees Celsius and the hottest being 67 degrees Celsius. Honestly, this isn't bad at all. Look, here's the thing. Zen 2 chips have a tendency to run hot. The Ryzen 5 3600 in my PC, which has 2 cores less than the SoC in the Series S, when under full load of Adobe Premiere Pro, tops out at 89 degrees Celsius. And remember, my PC has a bigger chassis with a beefy tower cooler, 3 intake fans and 3 exhaust fans, but still 89 degrees Celsius on full load. So yes, considering how silent the Series S runs and how small it is, Microsoft did a praiseworthy job with the thermals. Pro tip by the way, don't keep this enclosed. Either keep it open or have a clearance of at least 30 centimeters between the top of the console and the underside of whatever cabinet you're keeping it in. Also, here's a list of few games with the storage sizes as listed on the Microsoft Store. Keep in mind that the actual game size could vary. You might see a game listed at 52GB in size on the Microsoft Store, and when you start downloading it, it might show up as 48GB in size. However, a higher download size is always good to keep in mind just to ensure that you have the required space in your drive. Speaking of the storage size, yes, it's kind of low on the internal SSD, with the end user getting only 364GB to work with. You can't load many large sized games at once with this kind of space. Just put a couple of big games like Halo the Master Chief Collection and Gears of War 4 along with a couple of smaller sized games like Descenders and Soul Calibur 6. You'll be done. You can juggle between a couple of big games followed by 5 to 6 smaller titles like Hot Shot Racing, Kato, Faye, etc. But you would need an external drive for sure, and getting a mechanical hard drive is not a bad idea after all. Now, how does the Xbox One controller work with the Series S? Well, it works just fine. I didn't find any noticeable input lag between the two controllers, but you know what? I didn't want to play for a long time with the Xbox One controller because I was kind of spoiled with the new D-pad and shoulder buttons on the Series controller. But other than that, everything else is pretty great. So the very first thing that I did once I got my Series S set up was to sign back into the Xbox Insider program. You can use this platform to get early software builds to test before they go public. A disadvantage with this is that the builds do consist of some bugs, and I did come across one like here. Need for Speed Payback has been installed on my external drive, but it was still showing up, at least for some time, on the internal storage as well. I'm not sure if this issue persists with other games or if this happens on stable software builds as well. So let me know in the comments if you have seen any such issues happening. Another minor hiccup was with EA Play games. They sometimes tend to download way slower than the games from the Microsoft Store. I don't know if EA Play has servers different from the Microsoft Store, but your mileage may vary. Also, as of recording this video, neither the Series X nor the Series S support remote play officially through the Xbox app on Windows PCs. There are some unofficial workarounds available though, which of course you can find on some Reddit threads. Boot times, if I have to be pretty specific, have really improved. The console boots up from a complete shutdown within 15 seconds, while from the rest mode, it just takes a second to boot right back in. Just wow. Finally, Quick Resume, which is being touted as a next-gen feature. Well, it certainly isn't for someone like me who just sticks to one game full time, but hey, it works absolutely fine. I tested it between multiple games, optimized and non-optimized across storages, and it works everywhere, even on the external hard drive, though with some hiccups. Here's a list of all the different scenarios that I used to test Quick Resume. Well, conclusion time. So, what do I think about the Series S? Should you get one? Well, if you have a 1080p 60Hz TV or a 1080p 60 or 120Hz monitor and you're not looking to upgrade it to 4K, Or if you're coming from an OG Xbox One or One S or even a standard PS4, or you don't have enough space for a towering Series X, or if you're simply looking to get into gaming with the latest hardware without spending much money, yes, you should get a Series S. It is absolutely worth a buy. But the question will always come, is the extra money for the Series X worth it? Well, if you own a 4K TV, or if you're looking to upgrade from an Xbox One X or a PS4 Pro, the Series X is definitely the way to go. Now, don't get me wrong here, but I'll be honest and it's quite obvious. The Series S is an upgrade to the One S, not the One X. Even Microsoft touts it in the same way. And the Series S runs the One S versions of a game, which means that if a game ran at 30 FPS on the One S, it will still run at 30 FPS on the Series S as long as it's not optimized. Plus, you have a lot of games that supported 60 FPS on the One X, either with stutters or with stable frame rates, but those all run smoothly now on the Series X. So those who own an Xbox One X, well, the Series S is not for you. You can either upgrade to the Series X or just stick with your existing console for 2 to 3 years and get a revision which will, well, definitely come. That's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Well, if you did like it, please do consider to hit a like and also check out the other videos that I've posted. If you've bought the Series S, please do let me know in the comments about your experience so far. Also consider subscribing to the channel for more such content. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Here's Cop Inferno, signing off.